Imagine walking through life knowing that at any moment someone could try to end it. Not once, not twice, but dozens of times. For Adolf Hitler, this wasn't imagination, it was reality. Between 1921 and 1944, the Nazi dictator faced an astounding 44 documented assassination attempts. From amateur plots involving homemade bombs to elaborate military conspiracies orchestrated by his own generals, Hitler's survival defied probability itself. What kept him alive when so many wanted him dead? Was it luck, paranoia, or something far more calculated? Tonight, we'll uncover the most shocking attempts on Hitler's life, revealing how close the world came to a dramatically different history. Long before Hitler became the feared dictator of Nazi Germany, attempts on his life had already begun. The first recorded assassination attempt occurred in 1921, just 2 years after he joined what would become the Nazi Party. During a speech at a Munich beer hall, an unknown assailant threw a beer mug at Hitler's head. The primitive attack failed, but it marked the beginning of what would become a deadly pattern. The Munich Putsch of 1923 brought Hitler his first taste of real political violence. As he marched with his followers toward the Bavarian government building, Bavarian police opened fire. 16 Nazis died in the street battle, and Hitler himself was injured when he dislocated his shoulder diving for cover. While not technically an assassination attempt, the event demonstrated how vulnerable Hitler remained during his early political career. By 1932, as Hitler's political power grew, so did the sophistication of plots against him. Communist and social democratic opponents recognized the growing threat he represented. Several attempts involved planted explosives at rallies and speeches, but Hitler's increasingly paranoid security measures began paying dividends. His bodyguards, led by the fanatically loyal Sepp Dietrich, developed protocols that would become legendary for their thoroughness. One particularly chilling attempt occurred during a 1932 campaign stop in Stralsund. Local communist militants had planted a bomb beneath the platform where Hitler was scheduled to speak. The device was discovered just hours before the event when a janitor noticed suspicious wiring. The bomb contained enough explosive material to level the entire building. But perhaps the most haunting near miss of this period happened in February 1933, just weeks after Hitler became chancellor. A 21-year-old carpenter named Maurice Bavaud had traveled from Switzerland with a single purpose: to eliminate Hitler. Armed with a pistol, Bavaud attended multiple Nazi rallies, positioning himself within striking distance of his target. At a commemoration ceremony in Munich, he stood less than 10 feet from Hitler, finger on the trigger. Yet at the crucial moment, Bavaud found his view blocked by tall SS officers who had positioned themselves protectively around their leader. The moment passed, and Hitler lived to see another day. The pattern was becoming clear. Those who sought Hitler's death faced not just one man, but an entire apparatus designed to keep him alive. However, the most dangerous threats were yet to come, emerging from within Hitler's own inner circle. As World War II progressed and Germany's military situation deteriorated, opposition to Hitler grew within the very institution he relied upon most, the German Wehrmacht. By 1943, a sophisticated network of military officers, aristocrats, and civil servants had formed around the central goal of eliminating Hitler and negotiating peace with the Allies. The conspiracy centered on Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg, a decorated war veteran who had lost his left eye, right hand, and 2 fingers on his left hand while serving in North Africa. Despite his injuries, Stauffenberg possessed something his fellow conspirators lacked: regular access to Hitler's military briefings at the Wolf's Lair, Hitler's heavily fortified headquarters in East Prussia. The plot, known as Operation Valkyrie, was breathtakingly ambitious. The conspirators planned not just to eliminate Hitler, but to execute a complete military coup, seizing control of Berlin and other major German cities while simultaneously opening negotiations with the Western Allies. They had infiltrated key positions throughout the military hierarchy and had developed detailed plans for assuming control of the government within hours of Hitler's death. On July 15, 1944, Stauffenberg attended a military briefing at the Wolf's Lair, carrying a briefcase containing a British-made bomb. The device, weighing just over 2 pounds, contained enough explosive power to kill everyone in a small room. However, at the last moment, the briefing was moved to a larger venue, and neither Heinrich Himmler nor Hermann Göring, secondary targets, were present. Stauffenberg decided to abort, reasoning that eliminating Hitler alone would not be sufficient for the coup's success. 5 days later, on July 20th, 1944, Stauffenberg returned to the Wolf's Lair for what would become the most famous assassination attempt in history. This time, he was determined to proceed regardless of who else might be present. The briefing was scheduled to take place in Hitler's usual bunker, where the concrete walls would amplify the bomb's devastating effect. But fate intervened once again. Due to an unexpected visit from Italian leader Benito Mussolini later that afternoon, the meeting was moved to a wooden conference hut above ground. The change of venue would prove crucial. Stauffenberg activated the bomb's 10-minute timer and placed his briefcase under the heavy oak conference table, positioning it as close to Hitler as possible. He then excused himself, claiming he needed to make an urgent phone call. At 12:42 p.m., the bomb exploded with tremendous force. The wooden building was virtually destroyed, its windows blown out and roof collapsed. Of the 24 people in the room, 4 died and everyone else was injured. Hitler himself was thrown to the ground, his hair singed, his right arm partially paralyzed, and his eardrums damaged. His pants were shredded, and wooden splinters had punctured his legs. Yet, incredibly, Hitler survived. The heavy oak table had absorbed much of the blast, and the open windows of the wooden hut had allowed the explosive force to dissipate rather than concentrating it as concrete walls would have done. Moreover, just minutes before the explosion, Colonel Heinz Brandt had unknowingly moved Stauffenberg's briefcase to the opposite side of the table's heavy wooden support, placing the barrier directly between Hitler and the bomb. Within hours, Hitler appeared on radio to announce his survival, describing it as Providence protecting him to fulfill his destiny. The conspiracy quickly unraveled as the plotters' communications were intercepted and their plans exposed. Stauffenberg and 3 co-conspirators were executed by firing squad that very evening in the courtyard of the Bendler block in Berlin. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Over the following months, the Gestapo arrested approximately 7,000 people connected to the plot. Trials before the fanatical judge Roland Freisler resulted in the execution of nearly 200 conspirators, including field marshals, generals, politicians, and aristocrats. Many were hanged with piano wire from meat hooks, their deaths filmed for Hitler's viewing. But the July 20th plot was neither the first nor the last serious military attempt on Hitler's life. The story of how Germany's own military elite repeatedly tried and failed to eliminate their supreme commander reveals the extraordinary security apparatus that surrounded Hitler and the devastating consequences of their failures. While large conspiracies captured headlines, some of the most remarkable assassination attempts came from individuals acting entirely alone. These lone wolves, driven by personal conviction, religious faith, or simple desperation, often came closer to success than elaborate military plots. Georg Elser represents perhaps the most fascinating of these solitary assassins. A 36-year-old carpenter and clockmaker from Württemberg, Elser possessed neither political connections nor military training. What he did have was patience, skill, and an unwavering determination to prevent what he saw as an inevitable war. For over a year, Elser meticulously planned his attack. He studied Hitler's schedule, noting that every November 8th, the Nazi leader delivered a speech at the Bürgerbräukeller in Munich to commemorate the failed 1923 putsch. The speech always began at the same time and followed the same format. Elser identified this predictability as Hitler's vulnerability. Beginning in August 1939, Elser began visiting the beer hall regularly, carefully observing the layout and security procedures. He discovered that during the day, the hall was often empty or lightly supervised. Night after night, he would hide in the building until closing time, then emerge to work on his preparations. Using tools he had crafted specifically for the task, Elser slowly hollowed out a pillar directly behind where Hitler would stand to deliver his speech. The work was painstaking and dangerous. Each night, Elser had to chisel away stone and mortar without making noise that might alert security guards. He collected the debris in his pockets and disposed of it elsewhere in the city. The process took over 30 nights of careful work, during which discovery would have meant certain death. Elser's bomb was a masterpiece of improvised engineering. Using stolen explosive materials from his workplace at a quarry, he constructed a device with 2 timing mechanisms, a primary and a backup, virtually guaranteeing detonation. The bomb was designed to bring down not just the pillar, but a significant portion of the building's structure. On November 8, 1939, everything proceeded according to plan. Hitler arrived at the Bürgerbräukeller and began his annual address to Nazi Party faithful. The bomb was set to explode at 9:20 p.m., just as Hitler would typically be reaching the climax of his speech. Elser himself had already departed Munich, attempting to cross into Switzerland, where he hoped to wait out the war. At 9:07 p.m., Hitler concluded his speech, 13 minutes earlier than usual. He cited the need to return to Berlin due to the ongoing war situation. By 9:10 p.m., Hitler and his entourage had left the building. At 9:20 p.m., exactly as planned, Elser's bomb exploded with devastating force. The blast brought down the roof and collapsed the pillar as intended. 8 people died, and over 60 were injured. But Hitler was already miles away, traveling by train toward Berlin. The man who had come closest to changing history had missed his target by mere minutes. Elser was captured at the Swiss border just hours after the explosion, carrying suspicious materials and a Communist Party badge he hoped would convince interrogators he was part of a larger plot. Under torture, he eventually confessed to acting alone, a claim the Gestapo found almost impossible to believe. How could a simple carpenter accomplish what trained assassins and military conspiracies had failed to achieve? The near success of Elser's attempt led to significant changes in Hitler's security protocols. Never again would the dictator maintain such predictable public schedules. His appearances became increasingly random and secretive, making future assassination attempts far more difficult to plan and execute. Another remarkable lone wolf attempt occurred in 1943, orchestrated by Rudolf Christoph von Gersdorff, a Wehrmacht officer who had grown disgusted with Nazi atrocities on the Eastern Front. Gersdorff volunteered to serve as Hitler's guide during a visit to an exhibition of captured Soviet equipment in Berlin. His plan was devastatingly simple. He would carry concealed explosives with a 10-minute timer, activate the device just before meeting Hitler, and ensure they remained close together until the detonation. On March 21st, 1943, Gersdorff activated the bomb and approached Hitler as planned. However, the dictator moved through the exhibition far more quickly than anticipated, spending only 8 minutes instead of the expected 30 minutes. As Hitler departed, Gersdorff excused himself and desperately defused the bomb in a bathroom, preventing his own death and avoiding discovery. These individual attempts shared common elements that made them particularly dangerous. They were harder to detect through intelligence networks, required fewer people who might betray the plot, and often exploited Hitler's few remaining public appearances. Yet they also highlighted the extraordinary luck and paranoid security measures that kept Hitler alive when so many wanted him dead. The psychological profiles of these lone assassins reveal men and women driven by moral conviction rather than political ambition. Unlike the military conspirators who sought to preserve Germany's honor, or the communist agents who followed party orders, individuals like Elser and Gersdorff acted from personal conscience. Their failures would haunt them, those who survived, for the rest of their lives. Hitler's survival through 44 assassination attempts was not merely a matter of luck. Behind his longevity lay one of history's most sophisticated personal protection systems, a paranoid network of security measures that evolved continuously in response to each new threat. The foundation of Hitler's protection was the Schutzstaffel, or SS, which began as a small bodyguard unit, but grew into a vast security apparatus. At its core was the Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler, an elite regiment tasked exclusively with the dictator's personal protection. These men were selected not just for their physical capabilities, but for their fanatical loyalty to Hitler personally. Sepp Dietrich, who commanded Hitler's bodyguard from 1928 until 1943, developed security protocols that became legendary for their thoroughness. Every building Hitler entered was swept multiple times by explosive experts. Food was tested by designated tasters who consumed everything before Hitler's meals. His personal vehicles were armored and equipped with bulletproof glass, while multiple identical cars were used to confuse potential assassins about which vehicle actually contained their target. The paranoia extended to Hitler's inner circle. His personal valet, Heinz Linge, was responsible for maintaining Hitler's clothing and personal effects, ensuring that no explosive devices or poisons could be planted among his belongings. Even Hitler's dentist, Hugo Blaschke, was considered a potential security risk and was closely monitored during dental procedures. Hitler's residences became fortresses. The Berghof, his mountain retreat in Bavaria, was surrounded by multiple security perimeters, anti-aircraft defenses, and an extensive bunker system. The Wolf's Lair in East Prussia contained over 200 buildings protected by minefields, concrete barriers, and a garrison of over 2,000 security personnel. Visitors underwent extensive background checks, and even high-ranking military officers were searched before meetings. Travel presented unique challenges that spawned innovative security solutions. Hitler's train, named Führer Sonderzug Amerika, was a mobile command center equipped with communications equipment, meeting rooms, and its own anti-aircraft guns. The locomotive and several cars were armored, and the entire train was preceded by a pilot train that checked the tracks for explosives or sabotage. Air travel was even more restricted. Hitler flew rarely, and only in aircraft that had been thoroughly inspected by his personal mechanics. Flight routes were kept secret until the last moment, and multiple aircraft sometimes departed simultaneously to confuse potential attackers about which plane carried Hitler. The human intelligence network protecting Hitler extended far beyond his immediate bodyguards. The Gestapo maintained extensive surveillance of anyone deemed a potential threat, while informants throughout German society reported suspicious activities or conversations. This network proved remarkably effective at detecting plots before they could mature into serious threats. Perhaps most importantly, Hitler's security apparatus adapted continuously. After each assassination attempt, protocols were reviewed and modified to prevent similar future attacks. The failure of Elser's bombing led to random schedule changes and the elimination of predictable public appearances. The July 20th plot resulted in even more stringent vetting of military personnel with access to Hitler. The psychological aspect of Hitler's protection was equally sophisticated. His security chiefs understood that the dictator's paranoia, while sometimes excessive, actually enhanced his survival chances. Hitler's unpredictable behavior, sudden changes of plans, and reluctance to maintain regular schedules made him an extremely difficult target for assassins who required precise timing and location information. The cost of this security was enormous, both in resources and in the isolation it created around Hitler. By 1944, he had become virtually a prisoner of his own protection system, rarely appearing in public and increasingly isolated from the German people he claimed to lead. Yet this isolation, paradoxically, may have been the very thing that kept him alive when so many others wanted him dead. The effectiveness of Hitler's security apparatus raises troubling questions about how different history might have been if even one of the 44 assassination attempts had succeeded. Each failure strengthened the system, making subsequent attempts even more unlikely to succeed. As World War II progressed, Hitler became a target not just of German opposition groups, but of Allied intelligence services, who recognized that his elimination could dramatically shorten the war and save millions of lives. These international plots brought professional expertise and resources far beyond what domestic assassins could muster, yet they too would ultimately fail against Hitler's formidable security apparatus. The British Special Operations Executive, established by Winston Churchill with the directive to set Europe ablaze, developed numerous schemes to eliminate Hitler. The most ambitious was Operation Foxley, a detailed assassination plan developed in 1944 by the SOE's German section. The plan exploited intelligence gathered about Hitler's daily routines at the Berghof, his Bavarian mountain retreat. British agents had learned that Hitler took a daily walk along a specific path near his residence, usually between 10 and 11 a.m., accompanied by minimal security. The path led through a wooded area that offered excellent concealment for a sniper. Operation Foxley called for a two-man assassination team to be parachuted into the area, equipped with a high-powered rifle and detailed intelligence about Hitler's movements. The plan was remarkably sophisticated. The assassins would establish a hide position approximately 100 yards from Hitler's walking path, with predetermined escape routes through the Bavarian forest. Support networks of local anti-Nazi Germans would provide safe houses and transportation to the Swiss border. The operation had been planned down to the specific type of ammunition that would ensure Hitler's death, even if the shot was not perfectly placed. Yet Operation Foxley was never executed. British intelligence ultimately concluded that Hitler's death might actually strengthen German resistance rather than weakening it. A martyred Hitler could become a powerful symbol for continued fighting, while his replacement might prove more competent at conducting the war. The decision to abandon the operation remains controversial among historians, who argue that eliminating Hitler in 1944 could have prevented millions of additional deaths. Soviet intelligence services also developed multiple plots against Hitler, though many details remain classified even today. The NKVD, Stalin's secret police, had extensive networks within occupied Europe and access to German prisoners of war who might be turned into assassins. One documented attempt involved a Soviet agent who had been surgically altered to appear German and provided with impeccable forged documents. This agent, whose real name remains unknown in declassified files, spent months establishing a cover identity as a German businessman with connections to the Nazi Party. His mission was to gain access to Hitler through business meetings related to wartime industrial production. The plan required the agent to carry an undetectable poison that could be administered through physical contact or contamination of food or drink. The operation failed when the agent was captured during a routine Gestapo security sweep in Berlin. Under interrogation, he revealed enough details about Soviet intelligence methods to compromise other operations, though he apparently died before revealing the full scope of the assassination plot. His capture led to increased security screening of all individuals seeking meetings with Hitler, further limiting access to potential foreign assassins. American intelligence services, while less directly involved in assassination planning, provided crucial support for German resistance groups. The Office of Strategic Services, predecessor to the CIA, maintained contact with various anti-Hitler conspiracies and provided equipment, communications, and intelligence that supported their operations. Perhaps the most intriguing international plot involved a joint operation between British intelligence and German exiles. The plan centered on exploiting Hitler's known interest in occult and mystical subjects. British agents learned that Hitler regularly consulted astrologers and fortune tellers, seeing an opportunity to place an assassin in close proximity to their target. A German exile with genuine expertise in astrology was recruited and provided with a cover story that would make him attractive to Nazi occultists. The plan called for him to gain access to Hitler through his reputation as a mystic, then eliminate the dictator during a private consultation. However, the operation was compromised when another German exile, unaware of the plot, reported the suspicious activities of the would-be assassin to German authorities. These international attempts shared common challenges that domestic plots did not face. Foreign assassins had to overcome language barriers, cultural differences, and the lack of local support networks that German conspirators could rely upon. They also faced the constant threat of exposure through routine security checks that were specifically designed to identify foreign agents. The failure of professional intelligence services to eliminate Hitler, despite their extensive resources and expertise, underscores the effectiveness of the Nazi security apparatus. These agencies had successfully eliminated numerous other targets throughout the war, yet Hitler remained beyond their reach. The implications of these failures would echo through the remaining years of the war, as millions more would die while the world's most wanted man continued to evade those sworn to stop him. The international dimension of assassination attempts against Hitler also reveals the global recognition of his unique threat to humanity. Unlike other wartime leaders who were seen as representatives of their nation's interests, Hitler was viewed by Allied intelligence as a singular evil whose elimination would benefit all mankind. Understanding how Hitler survived 44 assassination attempts requires examining not just the external security measures, but the psychological factors that shaped his behavior and decision-making. Hitler's survival was, in many ways, a product of his own paranoid personality, traits that, while making him a difficult leader, paradoxically kept him alive when so many wanted him dead. From his early political career, Hitler displayed an almost supernatural awareness of potential threats. Associates described his ability to sense hostile intentions in crowds, often changing his route or schedule based on nothing more than intuition. This paranoid awareness served him well during the chaotic street politics of 1920s Germany, when political violence was common and personal security minimal. Hitler's paranoia manifested in seemingly irrational behaviors that actually enhanced his security. He frequently changed his mind about travel plans at the last moment, sometimes deciding not to attend events just minutes before departure. These sudden changes frustrated his staff and security detail, but they also made him an impossible target for assassins who relied on precise timing and predictable schedules. The dictator's eating habits reflected his deep-seated fear of poisoning. He employed multiple food tasters and often ate different meals from his guests, even at state dinners. His personal cook, Constanze Manziarli, was required to prepare his meals in isolation and under constant supervision. Hitler also maintained strict dietary restrictions that limited his exposure to potentially contaminated foods, though these were publicly attributed to health concerns rather than security fears. His sleeping arrangements were equally paranoid. Hitler rarely spent consecutive nights in the same room, often moving between multiple bedrooms within the same building. At the Wolf's Lair, he had access to several different bunkers and frequently changed his sleeping location without notice. This unpredictability made it virtually impossible for assassins to predict where he would be at any given time. Hitler's paranoia extended to his inner circle, creating a climate of suspicion that, while destructive to governance, enhanced his personal security. He deliberately fostered competition and mistrust among his subordinates, making it difficult for conspiracies to form or maintain secrecy. The constant surveillance and reporting meant that potential plots were often discovered before they could develop into serious threats. The psychological impact of surviving multiple assassination attempts created a feedback loop that reinforced Hitler's paranoid behaviors. Each failed plot confirmed in his mind that Providence was protecting him for a special destiny. This belief system, while delusional, actually contributed to his survival by maintaining the high level of vigilance and unpredictability that made him such a difficult target. Hitler's public appearances became increasingly rare and carefully controlled as the war progressed. By 1943, he had virtually disappeared from public view, making speeches only through radio broadcasts and limiting his personal appearances to small, carefully vetted groups. This isolation, while weakening his connection to the German people, removed him from the reach of potential assassins who might exploit public events. The dictator's relationship with his bodyguards reflected his paranoid psychology. He trusted them completely while simultaneously testing their loyalty through elaborate scenarios and unexpected changes of routine. This created a cadre of protectors who were both fanatically devoted and constantly alert to potential threats, since they knew their own lives depended on Hitler's survival. Hitler's paranoia also influenced his military decision-making in ways that affected his security. His reluctance to trust field commanders led to increasingly centralized control, which required more face-to-face meetings and communications that could potentially be exploited by assassins. However, these meetings were conducted under such stringent security measures that they actually became less vulnerable than more routine activities. The psychological toll of constant vigilance was evident in Hitler's declining health during the final years of the war. Associates noted his increasing tendency toward isolation, his reluctance to trust even longtime companions, and his growing preoccupation with security matters. Yet these very symptoms of psychological deterioration may have been the factors that kept him alive when so many others wanted him dead. Perhaps most remarkably, Hitler's paranoid behaviors often appeared to be validated by events. His last-minute decision to leave the Burgerbräukeller early in 1939 saved his life from Elzer's bomb. His insistence on multiple security sweeps prevented other assassination attempts from succeeding. These apparent confirmations of his paranoid instincts reinforced behaviors that, while destructive in many ways, proved essential to his survival. The intersection of Hitler's paranoid psychology with professional security measures created a protection system that was greater than the sum of its parts. His unpredictable behavior made the already formidable Nazi security apparatus even more effective, creating a moving target that proved almost impossible to hit, despite dozens of attempts. As Nazi Germany faced inevitable defeat in the final year of World War II, attempts on Hitler's life took on an increasingly desperate character. The failed July 20th plot had decimated the organized military resistance, but scattered groups and individuals continued their efforts to eliminate the dictator, driven now less by hope of changing Germany's fate than by the need to prevent further destruction. The aftermath of Operation Valkyrie created a climate of terror within the German military and civilian leadership. The mass executions and investigations had effectively destroyed the networks that might have supported future assassination attempts. Yet even in this environment of fear and surveillance, some continued to plot against Hitler's life. In October 1944, a group of Wehrmacht officers stationed in Berlin developed what they called the Final Solution, not to be confused with the Nazi genocide program of the same name. This conspiracy involved officers who had escaped detection after July 20th and were determined to make one last attempt before Germany's complete collapse. The plan centered on exploiting Hitler's occasional visits to military hospitals to boost morale among wounded soldiers. Intelligence indicated that Hitler would visit a specific facility in Berlin, where security would necessarily be lighter due to the medical environment. The conspirators planned to position an explosive device in a hospital room that Hitler was scheduled to visit, timing the detonation for maximum effect, while minimizing casualties among patients and medical staff. However, this plot was betrayed by a nurse who overheard conversations between the conspirators. The Gestapo arrested the entire group within days of the planned attack. The subsequent interrogations revealed that despite the decimation of the July 20th conspirators, networks of resistance still existed within the German military, though they were now far more fragmented and cautious. Perhaps the most poignant of the final attempts came from an unexpected source: a group of teenagers and young adults known as the White Rose Resistance Group survivors. While the original White Rose leaders had been executed in 1943, some associates had escaped detection and continued to operate underground networks in Munich and other cities. In early 1945, these young resistors developed a plan that reflected both their desperation and their limited resources. They had learned that Hitler occasionally traveled by car through certain districts of Berlin during his increasingly rare movements around the city. Their plan involved a coordinated attack using Molotov cocktails and stolen military explosives, targeting Hitler's convoy during one of these journeys. The plot required precise timing and coordination between multiple attack points along a likely route. The young conspirators spent weeks studying traffic patterns and security procedures, positioning themselves and their weapons at strategic locations throughout the city. On the appointed day, they waited for hours in freezing February weather for Hitler's convoy to appear. The attack never materialized. Hitler's route was changed at the last moment due to air raid warnings, and his convoy never passed through the targeted area. The conspirators were forced to abandon their positions and dispose of their weapons, narrowly avoiding detection by Gestapo patrols that were conducting increased security sweeps throughout Berlin. The final documented assassination attempt against Hitler occurred in March 1945, just weeks before his death in the Berlin bunker. This attempt came from within Hitler's own household staff, a remarkable breach of the supposedly impenetrable inner circle that had protected him for so many years. Rokas Misch, one of Hitler's bodyguards, later described discovering suspicious activities among certain staff members in the Führer bunker. These individuals, whose names remain classified in some archives, had apparently obtained access to poison that they planned to introduce into Hitler's food or medication. The plot was discovered only when one conspirator confided in another staff member who reported the conversation to security. The incident demonstrated how desperate the situation had become by the war's final weeks. Even individuals who had been personally selected for their loyalty and had undergone extensive security screening were now willing to risk their lives to eliminate Hitler. The discovery of this plot led to the final major security purge of Hitler's household, with several staff members disappearing into Gestapo custody just days before the bunker's final collapse. These final attempts shared characteristics that distinguished them from earlier plots. They were marked by desperation rather than careful planning, undertaken by individuals who had little hope of survival, regardless of success or failure. The conspirators were motivated less by political calculation than by moral revulsion at the continued destruction Hitler represented. The failure of these last attempts highlights how completely Hitler had become isolated from normal human contact by 1945. His world had shrunk to the concrete walls of the Führer bunker, surrounded by a handful of fanatically loyal associates and guards who represented the last remnants of the Nazi apparatus. Even within this tiny circle, however, the desire to end Hitler's life persisted until the very end. The proximity of these final assassination attempts to Hitler's eventual demise raises haunting questions about how history might have changed if any had succeeded. By 1945, Hitler's death might have shortened the war by weeks or even days, potentially saving thousands of lives and preventing the final destruction of Berlin and other German cities. The failure of 44 assassination attempts against Hitler forces us to confront one of history's most haunting questions. What if just one had succeeded? The ripple effects of Hitler's survival extended far beyond Germany's borders, shaping the post-war world in ways that continue to influence global politics today. If Georg Elser's meticulously planned bomb had exploded 13 minutes earlier in November 1939, World War II might have ended before it truly began. With Hitler dead and the Nazi leadership in chaos, the planned invasion of France might never have occurred. The Holocaust, still in its early stages, could have been halted before it claimed 6 million lives. The Soviet Union might never have lost 27 million citizens. and the United States might not have been drawn into European warfare. The success of Operation Valkyrie in July 1944 would have created an entirely different scenario. By then, the war's outcome was already determined, but Hitler's death might have shortened the conflict by months. The conspirators planned to immediately open negotiations with the Western Allies, potentially preventing the destruction of Berlin, the battle for Okinawa, and even the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Hundreds of thousands of lives hung in the balance of Stauffenberg's briefcase placement. The psychological impact of Hitler's survival on his would-be assassins created its own tragic legacy. Many of those who failed to kill Hitler were haunted by their failure for the rest of their lives. Rudolf Christoph von Gersdorff, who survived the war, spent decades tormented by the knowledge that he had been seconds away from changing history. He would often speak of the weight of those 8 minutes when Hitler moved too quickly through the exhibition, preventing the bomb's detonation. Adolf Hitler's survival through 44 assassination attempts represents one of history's most remarkable and tragic examples of how individual fate can shape global events. Each failed attempt allowed the Nazi regime to continue its devastating course, resulting in millions of additional deaths and unprecedented destruction across Europe. The human cost of these failures extends far beyond the immediate casualties of the plots themselves. Every day that Hitler remained alive after 1943 meant continued persecution of Holocaust victims, prolonged suffering for prisoners of war, and extended devastation for civilian populations across occupied Europe. The failure of the July 20th plot alone may have cost more lives than any other single day's events during the entire war. The technical and psychological factors that kept Hitler alive reveal the extraordinary challenges faced by those who sought to eliminate him. His paranoid personality, while destructive to effective governance, created unpredictable behaviors that confounded even the most carefully planned assassination attempts. The sophisticated security apparatus that surrounded him represented resources and manpower that might otherwise have been deployed in the war effort, yet proved essential to his survival. The diversity of assassination attempts, from lone wolves like Georg Elser to elaborate military conspiracies like Operation Valkyrie, from international intelligence operations to desperate final plots, demonstrates the widespread recognition of Hitler as a unique threat to humanity. People from every segment of German society and from allied nations around the world recognized that eliminating Hitler could change the course of history. The statistics themselves tell a staggering story. Across 23 years, from 1921 to 1944, Hitler faced an average of nearly 2 assassination attempts per year. The frequency increased dramatically during wartime, with 1943 and 1944 seeing multiple serious plots. The resources devoted to protecting him were enormous. By 1944, over 3,000 people were directly involved in his personal security, from bodyguards and food tasters to intelligence analysts and building inspectors. The moral complexity of these assassination attempts continues to challenge historians and ethicists. While the desire to eliminate Hitler appears morally justified given his crimes, the methods employed often involved significant risks to innocent bystanders and the potential for unintended consequences. The British decision to abandon Operation Foxley, based on concerns that Hitler's martyrdom might strengthen German resistance, illustrates the difficult calculations involved in such operations. The international nature of the threat Hitler represented is perhaps best illustrated by the fact that assassination attempts came from German military officers, communist agents, religious opponents, foreign intelligence services, and ordinary citizens who simply could not tolerate his continued existence. This unprecedented consensus across political, national, and ideological boundaries demonstrates Hitler's unique position as an enemy of humanity itself. The legacy of these failed attempts has influenced security protocols for world leaders ever since. Modern protective services study the techniques that kept Hitler alive, learning both from the successes of his security apparatus and from the near misses that revealed vulnerabilities. The paranoid measures that protected Hitler have become standard practice for protecting democratic leaders from similar threats, though modern technology has created both new vulnerabilities and new protective capabilities. The technical evolution of assassination attempts during Hitler's era also marked a turning point in the history of political violence. Early attempts relied on simple weapons, thrown objects, pistols, basic explosives. By the war's end, Conspirators were using sophisticated timing devices, military-grade explosives, and coordinated multi-stage operations that resembled modern special forces missions more than traditional assassinations. Perhaps most troubling is the recognition that Hitler's survival was not inevitable. Multiple attempts came within minutes or inches of success. Elzer's bomb missed Hitler by 13 minutes. Stauffenberg's briefcase was moved just feet away from its intended position. Small changes in timing, positioning, or circumstance could have dramatically altered the course of World War II and the Holocaust. The story of these 44 assassination attempts serves as a sobering reminder of how individual actions and coincidences can shape global events. It highlights both the courage of those who risked everything to stop Hitler and the tragic consequences of their failures. Most importantly, it demonstrates that evil's triumph is never inevitable. It often depends on the failure of good people to act effectively when action is most needed. The survivors among Hitler's would-be assassins carried their burden for decades after the war. Those who lived long enough to see the full scope of Holocaust documentation understood exactly what their failures had cost the world. Their testimonies, recorded in post-war interviews, reveal men and women who never forgave themselves for coming so close to changing history, only to fall short by moments or inches. The world Hitler left behind was forever changed by his survival through these assassination attempts. The additional years of his life meant extended suffering for millions and damage to civilization that required decades to repair. Understanding how he survived these attempts helps us comprehend not just the mechanics of historical change, but the profound responsibility that comes with the power to alter history's course. The Cold War that followed World War II might have taken a completely different form if Hitler had died earlier. The division of Germany, the Berlin Wall, the nuclear arms race, all of these defining features of the post-war world were shaped by the specific circumstances of how World War II ended. A successful assassination in 1943 or 1944 might have prevented Soviet domination of Eastern Europe, changed the nuclear balance of power, and created an entirely different global political structure. In the end, Hitler would die by his own hand in April 1945, cheating his would-be assassins of their ultimate victory. But the story of their attempts remains a testament to the courage of ordinary people who recognized extraordinary evil and risked everything to stop it, even when the odds of success seemed impossibly small. Their failures remind us that history is not predetermined, that individual actions matter, and that the difference between triumph and tragedy can be measured in minutes, feet, or the turn of a single screw on a timing device. The legacy of these 44 failed attempts continues to echo through history, a stark reminder of how close the world came to a dramatically different fate, and how the survival of one man shaped the destiny of millions. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more history documentaries.